Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jennie. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode,
its guns can no longer stop anything.
The strongest fortress in the world.
And it also fails completely.
I could weep for joy.
Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Justin. Last episode we watched Neville Chamberlain's government survive a vote of no confidence, but only barely. Its authority in ruins after the Norway debacle. We watched Colonel Oster warn the Dutch that the invasion was coming, and no one believed, because he'd cried wolf so many times before, even though the wolf had always actually been there. This episode is different from anything we've done before. We're not covering a week, we're covering one single day. May 10th, 1940, because this is the day this entire war has been building toward, since German forces crossed the border into Poland on September 1st, 1939.
I'm Jennie. In the space of about 18 hours, Germany invades 4 countries at once. A fortress, considered the strongest in the world, falls to 80 men in gliders. Paratroopers try to kidnap an entire royal family and government in a single morning. And in London, a prime minister resigns and is replaced by the man who will lead Britain through the rest of this war. We're going to walk through this day almost hour by hour, because it's just that kind of day. Let's get into it.
At 1 a.m. at Vincennes, a medieval fortress outside Paris that serves as General Maurice Gamelin's command post. The Allied Supreme Commander receives a report from the French minister in Luxembourg describing suspicious movements. 30 minutes later, confirmation arrives from Brussels. At 3:15 a.m., French secret agents operating inside the Rhineland in Germany send a simple, chilling message that says, "Columns moving west."
At 5:05, the air raid sirens at Vincennes begin to wail. 15 minutes later, the Admiralty in London signals that Calais and Dunkirk are being bombed, that Holland is under invasion, that French airfields in the north are under attack. At 5:30, General Georges, commanding the French Northeastern Front, gives the alert order to General Bilot, commanding Army Group 1. Gamelin learns at 6:30 that Belgium has formally asked France and Britain to intervene and move their troops to the pre-planned defensive lines. He telephones Georges. There's no radio at the command post because they don't want to give away their position. Georges says, "I suppose, mon general, that this is the case for the deal plan." Gamelin answers, "As the Belgians are calling us, do you see what else we can do?" Georges says, "I certainly do not."
And so, within minutes, the Allied plan we described previously is set in motion. The best Allied mobile forces begin rushing north into Belgium, exactly as German planners have been counting on for months.
At 3 a.m, Hitler's train pulls into Oiskirchen, near Aachen, close to the Belgian border. In the darkened railway station, a fleet of cars waits to take him and his staff to a command post built into a heavily wooden hilltop, near the village of Rodert. Its code name is Felsenest, or Eyrie on the Cliffs in English. The bunker has been blasted directly out of rock. Wooden barracks and offices are hidden in the surrounding forest behind barbed wire and concrete.
At 5:30 a.m., the German High Command announces that German troops have crossed the borders of Holland, Luxembourg, and Belgium. Resistance near the frontier, the announcement claims, has been broken everywhere. Often, it notes, with the closest cooperation of the Luftwaffe. Luxembourg falls that same day. German tanks cross into the Grand Duchy with almost no opposition at all, reaching the edge of the Ardennes forest by evening, while Luxembourg's royal family is evacuated south into France.
The most extraordinary single operation of the entire day happens at dawn near Maastricht, on the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. Fort Aben-Amel sits in the junction of the Albert Canal and the Meuse River, and it is, by most historical assessments taken before this morning, the strongest fortress in the world. The linchpin of Belgium's entire forward defensive line, its guns positioned to devastate any German advance across the canal. It's garrisoned by 1,100 men behind massive walls of concrete and steel.
Germany has spent months studying this problem, building a full-scale replica of the fortress's exterior for rehearsal. Their solution is audacious. 42 gliders towed by Junkers 52 transports cross the Belgian border at dawn in near silence. Most of the force cuts loose to seize nearby canal bridges, but 10 gliders land directly on top of the fortress itself. Roughly 80 German combat engineers spill out and attack the gun emplacements from above, a direction the fortress was never designed to defend against, using specially designed hollow charge explosives that focus the force of a blast directly through thick concrete. It's the first time in history that gliders are used in an assault landing, and the first combat use of shaped explosive charges. Within minutes, the fortress's main guns are destroyed. The stunned garrison retreats into the tunnel network beneath the fort. Aben Amal won't fully surrender until the following day, once ground reinforcements arrive. But from this first hour, its guns can no longer stop anything, and the road into Belgium lies open.
At that same exact moment, roughly 90 miles to the northwest, Germany launches an even larger airborne operation against the Netherlands. The war's first attempt to win a country's surrender by capturing its government and royal family in a single morning. General Kurt Student's 7th Airborne Division drops roughly 2,000 parachutists beginning at 4:30 a.m. Their targets are the airfields at Valkenburg, Ypenburg, and Ockenbroek, all clustered around The Hague, plus the vital bridges at Moerdijk and Dordrecht further south.
The plan behind Valkenburg, Ypenburg, and Ockenborg, hopefully I pronounced those correctly, is audacious. Once those airfields are secured, transport planes will land the 22nd Air Landing Division directly into the heart of the Dutch government, capturing Queen Wilhelmina, her ministers, and the entire military high command in one stroke. And it very nearly works. And it also fails completely. At Valkenburg, the paratroopers land successfully, but the runway surface turns out to be unsuitable for the incoming transports carrying reinforcements, and Dutch counterattacks begin almost immediately. At Ypenburg, Dutch defenders have deliberately littered the airfield with obstacles and positioned strong anti-aircraft batteries. Many German transports are shot down before they land, and the paratroopers who do get to the ground find themselves quickly surrounded. Ockenburg goes no better.
By the end of the day, the attempt to seize The Hague and capture the Dutch government has to be called off entirely. The surviving forces ordered to fight their way towards Rotterdam instead, harassed by Dutch troops the whole way. It is a spectacular German failure, one of the only clear tactical defeats German forces suffer anywhere on this entire opening day. But at Valhaven Airfield near Rotterdam, the story is different. German paratroopers under Hauptmann Karl Lothar Schultz secure the field after fierce fighting, clearing the way for the 22nd Air Landing Division's infantry regiments to land and reinforce, and Rotterdam itself is now directly threatened.
There's an account published afterward in a Nazi newspaper, and I do have to say that this is probably embellished quite a bit, but it's written by one of the officers who led the assault on Valhaven. And it's worth hearing because of how strange it is in the middle of this chaos. And again, I'm not entirely sure if it's true, but this is his account. He describes securing the airfield faster than expected, and deciding, since it's still early morning, to see about finding a cup of coffee. Specifically, Dutch coffee, as he notes, is said to be especially good. One of his men runs up and says, "Captain, the command post has been set up and there's coffee on the table." He finds an entire breakfast laid out, the radio playing the mayor of Amsterdam delivering a speech, and he says, "Boys, how did you conjure all that up so fast?" he asks. But he's told, "It wasn't us, Herr Kapitän. It was the Dutch who got it ready." Moments later, the sound of many engines arose, the transport planes carrying the rest of the airborne troops arriving to reinforce a battle that has already been won before the Dutch could finish their breakfast.
There's one more airborne operation from this morning that is worth mentioning because it's smaller, stranger, and points directly at what's coming in a few days. In the Belgium Ardennes, roughly 400 volunteers from the elite Großdeutschland division are flown in about 98 small Vliegtuigstoorslezen aircraft, not gliders, not paratroop transports, just small, slow observation planes, in an operation codenamed Navy. Their job is to cause confusion around the towns of Neufchâteau and Martel, blocking roads and disrupting Belgium and French defenses in exactly the area where General von Kleist's Panzer Corps will need to drive through toward Sedan in the coming days. It's a small operation compared to Aben Amel or the Dutch landings, but it is aimed precisely at the seam in the Allied line that we told you about last episode. That weak point in Sedan that the French Parliamentary Committee warned about back in March, and that General Huntzinger dismissed as needing no extra reinforcement.
Meanwhile, exactly as planned, Allied forces are rushing to meet what they believe is the main German thrust through central Belgium. British and French troops begin crossing into Belgium soon after 7 a.m., though the deployment is, in places, almost comically disorganized. French troops arriving by rail at the Belgian border find no Belgian locomotives available to haul them onward. The Belgians haven't cleared their own frontier roadblocks, set up to stop the French from forcibly marching in to defend Belgium, so French engineers lose an hour or more on demolition work just to get through their own allies' defenses. The British 3rd Division, commanded by Major General Bernard Montgomery, an important name to remember, is held up at the border by a Belgian officer who demands to see a formal permit before allowing British troops onto Belgian soil. The same officer's men later mistake Montgomery's advancing units for German infiltrators and open fire on them. The British finally ram their way through with heavy trucks and cross at 2:30 in the afternoon.
By midnight, Allied cavalry and light armored divisions have reached their planned line east of Brussels, running south to Namur, and on paper, this looks like real strength. 30 French divisions, 9 British, and most of Belgium's 22 divisions, against roughly 30 German divisions on the same front. Hitler, hearing reports that the Allies are advancing exactly where he hoped they would, is recorded as crying out, quote, "I could weep for joy."
There's a Belgian officer worth discussing because his judgment this week does turn out to be right, even though it earned him considerable criticism at the time, and even some today. And sorry for the pronunciation, but General van Overstraten, King Leopold's chief military advisor, has resisted French and British requests to position troops on Belgian soil before the invasion actually began, insisting it would compromise Belgian neutrality, thus giving the Germans a reason to invade. Historians have often treated this as simple stubbornness, but his deeper judgment, according to some later analysis, was sharper than that. He believed correctly that the French and British intended to advance no further than the middle of the country, and that they would let the Belgian army bleed itself out defending forward positions on the Albert Canal, while the Allies quietly consolidated behind them on the Deal line instead. By the end of the first day, that's essentially exactly what's happening.
It's worth discussing the numbers here because they complicate the story people sometimes tell about this campaign. The defending Allied nations actually field more total divisions than Germany does on this front, roughly 149 to 136. The Allies also have more tanks overall, and some of their individual tank models are better than their German counterparts. What Germany has that the Allies don't is concentration. German armor is organized into complete, self-contained panzer divisions under unified command, while French tanks are still scattered piecemeal across the army for infantry support. And Britain doesn't even have a single armored division on the European mainland yet. Its complete 1st Armored Division only gets ordered to France on the 11th. In the air, Germany does hold a numerical edge, roughly 3-2, with generally superior aircraft, but the ground numbers taken alone would not predict what's about to happen over the next 6 weeks. Command structure and doctrine are about to matter far more than any count of men or machines.
We told you last week about the Norway debate and the collapse of Chamberlain's authority in Parliament. This week, that collapse reaches its conclusion, and the timing is almost unbelievable. Britain changes its prime minister on the very morning its allies invaded. Chamberlain had been leaning toward resignation overnight, even before news of the German attack arrived. When the invasion reports come in, he briefly reconsiders, wondering whether changing leadership in the middle of a crisis is wise. But Clement Attlee tells him plainly that the Labour Party's national executive has decided that the party will only join a coalition government under a new prime minister, not under Chamberlain himself, and that settles it.
For a brief window, it looks as though Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary, will be the one asked to form the new government. Most of the Conservative Party would support him. So would Labour. Lord Beaverbrook summarizes the mood bluntly. Quote, Chamberlain wanted Halifax. Labour wanted Halifax. Sinclair wanted Halifax. The Lords wanted Halifax. The King wanted Halifax, and Halifax also wanted Halifax, end quote. That last part turns out not to be true. Halifax, by most accounts, genuinely does not want the job. He believes that Churchill would be more effective as Prime Minister, and that he himself could be more useful serving as Churchill's deputy. It's worth noting, too, that the failures of the Norway campaign were arguably at least as much Churchill's direct responsibility as anyone else's, given his role in the Admiralty. But the deeper institutional failure, never building a coherent structure to properly coordinate decisions and hold subordinates accountable, that one belongs to Chamberlain.
At 4:30 that afternoon, Chamberlain convenes the War Cabinet for its third meeting of the day. Partway through, he's handed a message confirming Labour's position. Besides Halifax, Churchill, and only Churchill, is acceptable to them as the head of any coalition. Chamberlain continues the meeting, finishes describing the deteriorating military situation on the continent, and only at the end reads out Labour's message to the room. Within half an hour, he's on his way to Buckingham Palace.
Around 6 in the evening, Chamberlain delivers his resignation to King George. The king asks Winston Churchill to form the next government. Churchill accepts, telling the king that he intends to build an all-party team to see the war through to victory. In addition to Prime Minister, he takes on the title of Minister of Defense himself, concentrating military decision-making under his own direct authority in a way that Chamberlain never did. That evening, Chamberlain broadcasts to the nation, his voice audibly trembling, and tells the country that Churchill has asked him to remain in the new War Cabinet, which he has agreed to do. Quote, "As long as I believed that there was a chance of preserving peace honorably, I strove equally hard to wage it with all my might." End quote.
The man who will lead Britain through the rest of this war formally takes office on the exact same day the war he's about to lead Britain through actually begins in earnest. Chamberlain spent the morning of May 10th still Prime Minister while 4 countries were being invaded. By that evening, Churchill was the new British Prime Minister.
One more invasion happens this same day, and it's worth covering because of how different in character it is from everything else we've described. Britain executes Operation Fork, the occupation of Iceland, landing roughly 800 Royal Marines from 2 cruisers in Reykjavik entirely unopposed. Iceland has declared itself effectively independent of occupied Denmark the previous month, and as we mentioned back in episode 31, but it has no defense force of its own, and Britain has judged, correctly, that Germany would very much like to use the island as a base to strike at Atlantic convoys. British forces quickly take control of the island's telecommunications and broadcasting systems, and arrest the German consul along with several dozen other German nationals living there.
There's understandable local confusion. Some Icelanders initially assumed Germany itself is the one invading, especially given everything else happening that day across the rest of Europe. Iceland's Prime Minister goes on the radio later that day describing Britain as a friend and asking his people to treat the arriving British forces as they would treat guests in their own homes. It is an invasion, but it has no shots fired, and by the standards of this day, remarkably little drama. Which is exactly why we want to highlight that it happened at all, buried as it is beneath everything else this day.
In the air over the Low Countries, the RAF and French air forces fight hard throughout the day. The Luftwaffe suffers heavy losses. Contemporary figures put the numbers of German aircraft destroyed at well over 300, with dozens more damaged, while French fighters alone claim roughly 90 German aircraft shot down for the loss of only 20 of their own. Despite those numbers, German bombers get through to bomb French airfields, but these attacks achieve remarkably little real damage. Of 472 French aircraft on the ground in one sector, only 4 are destroyed, with 30 more damaged, but still repairable. French planes keep taking off and landing throughout the day without serious interruption. It's a day that produces enormous casualty figures on the German side without changing the overall trajectory of what's happening on the ground in the slightest.
In Washington, President Roosevelt learns of the invasion at 11 at night on May 9th, Washington time. He immediately telephones Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau and orders the freezing of Belgian, Dutch, and Luxembourgish financial assets in the United States to keep them out of German hands. There's very little else he can do that night. Phone lines to Paris and Brussels are barely getting through at all. and he finally goes to bed at 2:40 in the morning, having done what he can from an ocean away. So, this is May 10th, 1940, the beginning of the war in the West. Germany invades France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg simultaneously at dawn. 80 men in gliders take the strongest fortress in the world in a matter of minutes, using a weapon nobody had used in combat before. German paratroopers nearly capture an entire royal family and government, and fail, narrowly, in one of the only real setbacks Germany suffers all day. The Allies rush north into Belgium exactly as German planners hope. And a small, disguised German force is already probing the seam in the line at Sedan that everyone had been warned about and nobody reinforced. Neville Chamberlain resigns as Prime Minister on the same morning his country's allies are invaded, and Winston Churchill takes his place by that evening. And, in a small, quiet operation almost nobody notices amid everything else, Britain occupies Iceland without firing a single shot.
Next episode, we'll follow what happens as this offensive continues to unfold, as the trap that's already closing around the Allied armies in Belgium becomes impossible to ignore. Thanks for joining us on episode 36 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you then.